This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to the program. I'm Roby Brock. We're glad to have you with us. In case you've been asleep at the wheel, the U.S. Congress has been taking up the issue of tax reform over the last several weeks. Here to help us break some of that down as well as talk about some other topics is Randy Zook. He's the president and CEO of the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce and the Associated Industries of Arkansas. I'm the only one that gets your title right.
Longest title in Arkansas.
Welcome back. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Let's define some of the parameters of the tax reform debate that's going on right now. You got a House version, you got a Senate version. They are not necessarily married at the hip.
Fairly close.
But one of the things that is consistent, you do have the lowering of the corporate tax rate from 35 to 20%. What are some other parameters that we need to stick with on this debate?
Well, I think that's the big corporate impact. The big personal impact will center around pass-through taxation, establishing a more competitive rate for the pass-through entities like LLCs, subchapter S corporations, LPs, et cetera. That's one piece of that. Plus the other is the enormous increase, doubling of the standard deduction. So a whole lot more people are going to be able to file a much simpler tax return.
And there are exemptions out there that are different between the two proposals, whether it's mortgage interest deduction or whether it's student loans and some other factors like that.
State and local taxes.
All right, so with all of that in mind, you're an advocate that this is needed and you're supportive of this. The U.S. Chamber is supportive of this. The Arkansas State Chamber is supportive of this. Randy Zook's supportive of this. Tell me why this is good for American and Arkansas businesses.
It makes us more competitive in the global economy. It avoids the trapping of profits earned overseas by U.S. companies because of the possibility of having to pay yet another tax when you bring profits back into the U.S. So the money sort of is in a box overseas and not available for investment in plant and equipment and wages and dividends.
What's to keep foreign governments from changing their tax structure in response to us changing our tax structure and keeping some advantages there?
Nothing other than competitive pressures and, the need for revenue. They're loath to increase their rates and give up some of that revenue because corporations are smart. They act and behave rationally, and if conditions change, their strategies change. So this is a major step in the right direction for the U.S.
There are a lot of critics out there that talk about the potential deficit-busting nature of this tax reform proposal here. By some many nonpartisan analyses, as much as $1.5 trillion added to the deficit. This is something that a lot of folks, particularly conservatives and Republicans, Tea Party conservatives, ran against deficit increases and adding to the national debt. How do you combat that?
Well, the key to all of this is the impact on growth in the U.S. economy. With this tax change, the likelihood is we're going to have greatly accelerated growth compared to the relatively anemic growth rates that we've had over the last several years. We should see our growth rate in the economy expand as much as twice what it is today, from 1.5 to 3+, maybe even 4%. And that growth is going to generate more revenue and should offer opportunities to keep the deficit at least in reasonable control compared to where we are today, but that doesn't do away with the need to control spending. We've still got to do that.
But some people are going to say this is Kansas math, Randy. I mean, we're going to spend and grow our way into this prosperity that when you kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of it, if you lower the corporate tax rate, you're going to reduce your revenue coming into the federal government. If you change those deductions and those exemptions to offset some of that, the math gets you at a $1.5 trillion deficit.
Well, our experience is not there. Our experience is that every time we've had substantial tax reduction and reform, federal revenue has increased, not decreased. So I think the proof will be in the pudding, but it's the only way to it's the only tool in the box to get the economy growing at the rate we need it to grow.
Let's shift and talk to state taxes here. There has been a legislative task force that's been at work for the better part of this year looking at some potential changes to the state tax code. They're right now they're kind of in an education mode. They'll have to be a little bit in a wait and see mode because of what's happening at the federal level. Do you expect anything significant to happen from that task force?
Well, everybody's optimistic that we'll be able to improve the fairness and the equity in the tax code, and I think that's a noble goal. It remains to be seen whether they're going to be able to actually do it. Right now, as you say, they're in a fact-gathering mode and learning. It's very complicated because there are so many exemptions. It takes a long time to kind of just walk back through each one of them and understand the history of them, and then understand the impact in changing if you make changes in those exemptions. So I think they're going to be cautious, and I think they're going to do a good job, and it's going to take some time. It's just, you can't snap your fingers and just make a quick decision on something that complex.
So if I'm just kind of being very general about this,
Okay.
your agriculture exemptions are a huge part of the state tax code, and business, manufacturing exemptions, another really big kind of
Right.
circle of tax advantages there. Randy Veach with the Arkansas Farm Bureau told me he's going to oppose every one of those agricultural exemptions coming off. Are you going to be opposed to
I'd be
changing some?
disappointed in Randy if he said anything else, and I will certainly be right there with him in opposing any substantive or significant changes in hard-won exemptions for manufacturers to make them more competitive with surrounding states. That's the backdrop you've got to look at all this in, is how does it affect our competitiveness relative to surrounding states for manufacturers, because those businesses are mobile and they will move to better economic conditions.
So if you've got those two kind of lines in the sand drawn right there, what can you really do significantly on tax reform in the state
I
of
would
Arkansas?
encourage the legislature to be careful and prudent in their considerations of this very complicated issue.
So we may not see something as ambitious at the state level
I don't
as we
know.
do at the federal level.
I think not, just judging the two. First of all, you have much more potential change at the federal level because the rates are much higher and the impacts are higher. So that's where you can really get some impact on what people pay in taxes. If everybody in the U.S. sees on average a $1,500 to $2,000 tax reduction next year, that's gonna change the folks' outlook.
Boost some consumer spending there.
Yeah,
All right, let's take a
absolutely.
quick commercial break. We'll come back and talk
Sure.
workforce development, maybe even a little tort reform,
Great,
if we got time.
you bet.
All right, Randy Zook of the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce is my guest. I'm Roby Brock. We're back right after this. Welcome back to the program. I'm Roby Brock. We're joined by Randy Zook of the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce, Associated Industries of Arkansas. Let's turn our attention to workforce development. The governor
Favorite
is
subject.
your favorite. I know you talk about it quite often. So I think you should get your name legally changed to include workforce development somewhere
There's a
in
thought.
your middle name there. The governor has restructured to some extent his workforce development group. A lot of talk, a lot of legislative input, a lot of private industry input. Kind of bring folks up to speed as to where we stand now with what we are trying to address from a state level in a cohesive manner with workforce development.
Well, just from a big picture, there's a skills gap in the U.S., and it's not unique to Arkansas. That's the good news. The entire country is facing this issue, and it's driven by the reality of demographics. We've got baby boomers by the thousands literally retiring from long-term career jobs, and when all that experience and capability walks out the door in a business, they're hard-pressed to backfill it with people who can pick up the slack and continue to operate the business as it's been working. So it's a demographic thing. We've got to, and it's also a structural thing. We pretty much gave up on most vocational technical training in the U.S. back, 20, 30, 40 years ago. We've shifted to almost total emphasis on pursuing four-year baccalaureate degrees. And in the reality is that there are tens of thousands, even millions of jobs that are going unfilled because people with the right skills are just not in the right places. So we've got a lot of backfill and work to do to get the system back in shape, to give kids access to all the full range of opportunities in the U.S. economy and prepare them for those opportunities.
I feel like we've been talking about workforce realignment for pretty much a
Long
decade
time.
now. So what's not moving in the right direction? What needs to change to meet this demographic reality that we're facing?
Well, in fairness, I think a big change that needs to take is business is going to have to accept more of the responsibility for making these changes or underwriting the cost of the changes getting the right resources in place.
They're going to have to put some money towards
put
tuition
some
and
more
training
skin
for
in
some
the
of
game,
these,
for equipment,
investing some of that stuff.
instructors. You know, it's just a matter of the right emphasis and the right resources being put in play in the right places. And more that's happening across the state. Enormous progress has been made. There's just a lot more to go.
Yep. All right, let's talk tort reform. And before we kind of get to that point, we've talked about we've got low unemployment, we've got high employment in the state of Arkansas. We
Yep.
do have this skills gap coming here. Interest rates still low, stock market booming, regulations
Life is
kind of
good.
rolling back.
Life is good.
It's there. Why do we need tort reform to improve the business climate in Arkansas?
Well, we need to be as competitive as possible as a state. We are simply out of step with too many states in terms of our civil justice system, and the time is now to make it a permanent change. You know, we did this back in '03
It
with
kind
a
of got undone.
statutory change, and it all got unpeeled by the state Supreme Court. So we need to bake this into the Constitution so that it's not so readily overturned or reversed.
I suspect this will be the biggest issue of the campaign season next year, bigger
I'll be
even than a
shocked
governor's
and
race.
amazed if it's not, because it will be a hot topic. It will be an intense debate, and we're going to make sure that our point of view, the business and healthcare and private sector's view of this is well advocated, and we think we've got a real good chance at this. So it's going to be a hot debate.
We will
though.
not get into the pros and cons on this. I'd like to have the other
Thank
side
you.
here for some fairness on that discussion right
Look
now,
forward
but it
to
is
that.
going to be a big one, and I will have you back to talk about that. All right,
Look
Randy
forward
Zook
to
with the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce, Associated
Randy.
Industry for Arkansas.
You bet.
Thanks for being here. After the break, 4 minutes for questions with Talk Business and Politics Wes Brown, and our Talk Politics Roundtables back right after this.